let's turn to the main agenda for today, which is the opportunity to explore exposure draft number 2 for the proposed 2020 Business Accreditation Standards. There will be time at the end of the day for some Q&A, so please join me without further ado in welcoming Nancy Bagranoff, former Dean and Professor of Accounting at the University of Richmond, Stephanie Bryant, Executive Vice President and Chief Accreditation Officer at AACSB International, and Jeff Perry, Executive Vice President and Chief Officer of Asia Pacific at AACSB International.
Thanks, John.
I give you the stage.
Well, good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Good. So we are so excited to be here with you today to really finally show you exposure draft number 2 for the Business Accreditation Standards and kind of how our vision is coming to life. We did great work on exposure draft 1, but I think you're going to be even more excited on exposure draft 2. So welcome to everyone that took time to come to the session today. And also we are live streaming this to people who couldn't be here today. So we say welcome to those of you who are joining us on the live stream as well. So today what we're going to do is review the key changes that have occurred between Exposure Draft 1, and that was issued in September at our accreditation conference, and show you kind of what's different between that version and what we're releasing today. It actually is on the website now. We also want to sort of give you an overview of really a flavor. What is it that we're doing? So when you go back to your schools, you can talk to your faculty about what's really different in the standards. We will have Q&A at the end. We will not be able to answer all your questions. Don't worry, we'll be here for the reception. We'll be here still tonight, tomorrow. So if you don't get your questions answered today, it's okay. We will be sure that we do find us and we will answer those questions. I want to really start by saying thank you to you. Thank you to all of you in the audience for your constant feedback over this approximately 18-month journey, and it really has been quite a journey. We've been all over the world, and many of you have been in the audience and have provided feedback personally or online, and you have really shown a great commitment to making sure that we get this right. We get the ideals of high quality and continuous improvement, and that the next standard is better than what you have right now, which we think is also very good. Here's kind of what's happened during all this listening tour.
Thanks, Stephanie. So deans know about listening tours, right? We all go on them. And for the last 18 months, the Business Accreditation Task Force has been on a listening tour. And I'd like to tell you that not only have we listened, but we have heard. And that's hard sometimes. You get very, very wedded to some of your ideas. We had some wonderful things we thought that we were proposing. I am still mourning the loss of Table 4-1, but you told us you didn't like it, so I'm trying to get over it. And I think I will. But we did listen to you. We had lots and lots of written communications. We've gone to meetings like this over and over again. We've done this all around the world. So we've checked in. We had a very global task force. We have a very global board at AACSB, and we've checked in with all different countries, and you're going to hear about globalization later. So we think that we've listened, we think that we've heard, and Jeff's going to tell you a little bit about the Business Accreditation Task Force.
Yeah, good afternoon. The Accreditation Task Force consisted of 16 deans from across the world. Now, as it says on the screen, we had 18 meetings and over 1,000 hours of voluntary hours put towards putting together the standards. Now, if you think about deans who are very busy, to think that we could get 16 deans together 18 times in 18 months was really quite an achievement. But the contribution from all the members of the task force has been amazing over that time. Not only did we meet together, but we also had separate working groups. We were going over the documents, the ideas, and exchanging ideas in a number of ways. So I really want to recognize all of the task force. All have been involved in the process from the start right through to now. So if members of the task force who are in the room, could you please stand up? Have we got? Yep, stand up, and could we give them a round of applause?
Okay, Okay, so we want to start by anchoring the discussion around the collective vision for business education that AACSB put out a thought leadership piece about 4 years ago. And as we pondered what should the structure of the new standards look like, this is a piece that we came back to multiple times, and we thought really long and deep about this. And actually, you're going to see this vision come to life. That's what we did in the new standards. We took these ideas and we said, how can we make those be inculcated through the standards in a way that we not only say these words, but we live these words? So for example, when we talk about catalysts for innovation, progress demands innovation, and it's hard. Innovating is hard. Being at the edge of what's happening is hard, but we want to live that. You will see innovation in the standards in a way that did not exist before. Co-creators of knowledge. There we're looking at how do we create knowledge at the intersection of academia and practice. So it's not just academics talking to each other, reading our own work, but how are we partnering with industry? How are we partnering with government agencies? How are we partnering with businesses to solve problems that matter to the world? So that is what we mean when we say co-creators of knowledge, not just us talking to each other. We also have hubs of lifelong learning, and you'll see Nancy's going to talk about that. What does that mean? When we talk about hubs of lifelong learning, it's really a different model today that's emerging for learning. You're seeing much more emphasis on things like experiential learning. Our classrooms are turning into laboratories of sorts. You're seeing students working on consulting projects. You're seeing all kinds of innovations happen, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. So we want to be at the center of that and helping to drive that forward. And that's what we mean when we say being hubs of lifelong learning. We as AACSB want to do that. Leaders on leadership. When we think about leadership, some of the first things we think about are values, integrity, ethics. You'll see those things are inculcated in the standards as well, even as far as in our guiding principles. Ethics and integrity, number one, and will always be number one for us. What we do and what we say as leaders is important. The last is enablers of global prosperity. So when you think about that, that's the one that actually really I'm the most excited about, because it's this idea that not only can we transform the lives of our students and help our students go out and be successful, that itself absolutely is societal impact. But think about the collective power of 862 business schools. That's how many business schools we have accredited in the world. What about all of us working together to solve problems, big and small? They can be problems in your community. They can be issues nationally, state, internationally, according to your mission. So we won't tell you how to do that, but imagine if we're all working together to solve some of society's problems. This is an era where business schools can really make a mark, and we think AACSB is correctly positioned to harness that so that all of us working together can make a difference in society with societal impact. So we're very excited about that. So what we want to do is give you an overview, and that's really how we want to do this session. We will show you the standards, but as opposed to killing you with the detail, minutia of that, we want to talk at a high level. Those things that are in the collective vision, how are they in the standards? So we want to show you how we did that.
Sure. So our goal was to develop standards that were more principles-based and outcomes-focused, and that is really hard to do. We all know that. Principles are great. It's what we want. It's what we strive for. But the minute you show someone a principle, they want to create a rule. And we found this happening in a number of different times. So I'll give you an example. We started out by saying in the Assurance of Learning standard that we would have you talk about your executive education program when it was a significant part of your revenues. Everybody wanted to know what significant meant. We went back to 5%. So we continued to keep principles where we could, but we also listened where we felt that a rule really was more efficient and would get the job done. We also focused on outcomes where we could, but you can't get away from inputs such as faculty qualifications. So you'll see, I think, as you read through here, they are more principles-based and outcomes-focused, but occasionally we had to go back to where we were before. And another thing I'll say about being principles-based, it does require a lot of judgment. We've heard from you. Peer review teams are going to need more training because when you apply that judgment, you've got to have a bit more experience and training behind you. So we understand that. So I hope you'll see that we have accomplished that goal as we go through today. Now, the objective was, as I said, principles and outcomes-based. Now we'll go through a bit the tactics that we employed in doing that. And the first one was to streamline the standards. But please note that we did not remove rigor. We know quality. We want to make sure that we're always thinking about quality schools. That's what's at the forefront. You know, we want to give that seal of quality. And so sometimes rigor has to enter that. Sometimes we can have more principles and feel that we're accomplishing it that way. We did get rid of redundancy. So we found as we read through the standards that sometimes things were in multiple places, and we tried to take that out. Now I will tell you, I gave a presentation at the Associate Dean's meeting last fall, or winter, and when I did that, I talked about a standard on curriculum having societal impact and Standard 9 being on societal impact. And I said, yeah, in Standard 4, we have a bit about the curriculum content and experiential learning, and the experiential learning is a little bit redundant with Standard 9 on societal impact. They said, well, why'd you do that? You said you're getting rid of redundancy. So I heard, and we don't do that anymore. So we did eliminate the redundancy. We simplified the language, and the standards we think are in a really good format now. So you'll see the standards, you'll see numbering through so that you can quickly cross-check and cross-reference in the basis for judgment and in the documentation area back to the standards themselves. So those are some of the things that we think that we've accomplished. Globally oriented, Jeff?
Thanks. With AACSB having members in over 100 countries throughout the world, it's really important that that global orientation is reflected in the standards. And the BATF was set up with a membership to reflect the membership and the accredited membership within the organisation. So throughout the document, throughout the standards, we've taken that into account. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Initially, we were looking at how would we see out, how well schools are doing with their graduates, and we had placements in there as a measure. And of course, that is very much what's used in North America. But throughout the world, there are other approaches to measuring how well your graduates do. So we've gone more broadly to graduate outcomes and allowing the school to identify what's appropriate for them. And the other area where we're taking into account different contexts and different capabilities throughout the world is in assurance of learning. In some countries, there are regional bodies who get schools to undertake quality assurance processes, and we're setting in place a system where you can get approval with certain criteria for those to be accepted as the process that you use for assurance of learning.
So language matters, and in a couple of places you'll see that we've changed our terminology. For instance, we're using the word learners instead of students. Students study, learners learn. So we think this is a much more modern and comprehensive approach. We also use the word competency goals versus learner goals. And those competencies still embody the knowledge and the abilities and the skills, but they also demonstrate that students are able to, learners, I still have to correct myself, that learners are able to actually do things. They have abilities. So those are two of the important language changes, and you'll see a few more as we go through. Stephanie?
So faculty qualifications is always an interesting area. What do we do here? Well, first of all, we listen to you, and we listen to what it is you want to see change about what's currently Standard 15. It's Standard 3 in the new standards. And what we heard you say is, we like to have a standard. We like to have a ratio. We don't want to go to the standards that have 0% essay, for example. There was no traction for that. But what we would like is more flexibility in how we categorize our faculty and classify our faculty, and also more flexibility in how we deploy our faculty. So a few ways that we did that. When you look at Table 3.1, when you see the new exposure draft, you'll see that it's organized by discipline. So that's different than the way it's organized today. Today, it's organized by org structure, and most people do departments. Problem with departments is you can have a department of accounting, finance, management, and knife sharpening and basket weaving all together, and they don't really necessarily relate to each other. Sometimes it's just an artifact of how many administrators you can have. There are lots of reasons why people organize departments the way they do. So it doesn't really make sense to have ratios at that level. It's not really a meaningful ratio. So what we said was, okay, what's meaningful? The BATF, and as we socialize this, said it's really it's the discipline. It's the discipline that underlies the degrees that you offer. So you'll see in our new Table 3.1, it's by discipline. Now, you get to specify what you call that discipline. So we had lots of conversation about should we give you the disciplines? Should we say accounting, finance, management, marketing, and so on? What emerged from our discussion is the landscape is very quickly changing. Remember, we are trying to write standards for the next, hopefully, 7 to 10 years. If we lock ourselves into terminology and systems that exist today that might not exist tomorrow, that might necessitate a change that we don't want to have to go back to the table for. So in the interest of being principles-based, we said, you tell us what your disciplines are, and interdisciplinary ways that you organize things, fine. And then list your faculty under that, and you will meet the ratio at the top level. So the relief there, and I can tell you as a former dean, I have been thrilled to the eyeballs with this, because, for example, take management. In the management area, you might have many different degrees under management. So let's say you have entrepreneurship, and let's say that's a management discipline in that area. Well, so do you really need to have all SA faculty or 40% SA faculty in that area? You know, one can make the argument, not so. So what we said was you list all the faculty and all the degrees under management in this example. The ratio must be met at the top level. What does that do? That gives you the power. That gives you the power to say, we will meet this number. We want to have that quality. We don't want to give that up. You guys were very clear about that. But we want to be able to have them where we want them and where it makes sense for our mission. And so we heard that and we did that. Also broaden the terminology a little bit. So currently in the current standards, we talk about PhDs. There are multiple other types of terminal degrees, so we're not away from terminal degrees. We're recognizing there are different types of terminal degrees. You may have a medical doctor teaching in a healthcare management course, terminally qualified, of course. So that might be an MD. So we're allowing for those types of nuances there, but still terminally qualified for SA. More flexibility in faculty deployment. So I talked about this already. How you deploy your faculty, that's currently in 15.2. It'll be in 3.2 in the new standards. How you deploy faculty. Currently, the rule is that you would deploy and have your ratios met by every location, by every program, by every degree, by every modality. That is incredibly restrictive for you, the school. So what we have said now is you've got to have the 40% overall. You deploy the faculty in a way consistent with your mission. You must be able to show high quality outcomes, but you have many more degrees of freedom now in how you deploy faculty. What this does is this puts the power in your hands to have the quality faculty, but you get to have much more freedom in how you deploy those faculty. We think that's a great change and hopefully a welcome change to everyone.
So Stephanie, when she talked about AACSB's collective vision, talked about lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is pretty important. Our students, when they leave us, they're not finished with their education. Our faculty members, when they complete their terminal degrees, they're not finished with their education. So in these standards, we emphasize lifelong learning, particularly in 2 of our standards. In Standard 4, when we talk about the curriculum, we talk about our students being able to be prepared for lifelong learning. Now, this may give you a little bit of angst because you say, how the heck can I do that and prove that I've done that? There are ways that you can certainly do that and integrate it into the education that you're providing by helping your students in terms of analytical and critical thinking, giving them those opportunities, giving them the opportunities to be creative, to ask why, to fail, to make mistakes. We're still going to maybe not always give them great grades, but we do want them to understand that failure can also make them better. So lifelong learning, what we're going to look for, as we will throughout many of these standards, is you to tell your story about how you achieve that. How do you prepare your students for lifelong learning, to embrace new technologies by not just memorizing every keystroke in a particular software program, but by thinking about how technology is changing and how they can be prepared to continue their learning after they leave us. And this applies to faculty as well. we want to make sure in Standard 7, when we talk about faculty development, that our faculty are current, that they're keeping up, and that we're providing them in schools with the resources that they need to be able to do that, and for them to continue in their content area to acquire knowledge and skills and abilities. So that's the importance of lifelong learning. We also, you know, and innovation is so important to AACSB, so important to us in our business schools, and we want to be able to emphasize and welcome innovation in our schools. We're careful in the standards at talking about innovation in a number of different ways. So for instance, in curriculum, we're looking for innovation in your curricular content, but also in your pedagogy and also in your delivery of your education. So we provide you many opportunities to demonstrate that you've embraced innovation and that you're supporting it.
One of the major developments in the last 10, 15 years, and that's accelerating, are the number of programs that schools are developing with other schools, not just in their own region or locality, but also internationally. And in the current standards, we have a few barriers that are stopping that occurring. So schools are saying, well, if I'm accredited, if I do this partnership with another school, this consortium with a number of schools, can I still meet the standards? So one of the major changes that we've made, and it's in the front piece before the standards, we actually have a full table where we've outlined a wide range of the types of combinations that schools engage in to put programs together. And in there we've identified, well, what would be included in scope when it comes to the accreditation and what would not be included in scope. And notably, dual and double degrees, top-ups and articulations, what's done at the other school is now excluded from being in scope with what's done in your school. I think this is a major move in these standards to allow the innovation, to allow the creativity and the development of new programs across jurisdictions and between schools.
And last but not least, we are in this version of the standards, again, recognizing that business schools of the future can collectively make a positive impact on society, such that our collective vision of business as a force for good is closer to being a reality. So the idea here, as I said in my introduction, is that collective vision is really becoming the cornerstone, and part of that is societal impact. You will see that societal impact is in 4 standards in a major way and mentioned moderately in one other standard. It's in Standard 1, so we expect you to tell us how your school is aligning your mission to make a difference in society. So it's in that standard, it's in the curriculum standard, which talks about what are you doing in the classroom in coursework, and we extend that also to experiential opportunities connected to the classroom. What are your students doing in ways that make positive societal impact? And then in Standards 8 and 9. And Jeff will talk about those in more detail in a few minutes. But Standard 8 is about your intellectual contributions. Is your research making a difference in society? We don't dictate how, because it's tied to your mission. We don't say it has to be everybody, but we say in your portfolio of intellectual contributions, do you have exemplars of research that is actually making a difference in society? And when you go out and you look at it, there's actually quite a lot out there, but we want to help drive that and make that an impetus in the new standards. And last but not least is we have a whole new standard since you last saw this, and that's Standard 9. We originally had 8 and 9, sort of the ideas together in one standard. So 8 now is intellectual contributions by itself with societal impact as a part of your portfolio, not all your portfolio. And a new standard, Standard 9, which is about what is your business school doing to make a difference overall. So I don't want to steal all Jeff's thunder, so I'm going to stop there on that. But we're really excited about that idea that societal impact is going to really be a rallying cry for us. So what we're going to do now, in the time we have remaining, is go through and let you at least lay your eyes on the standards. I'm sure everyone in this room has read this thoroughly in Exposure Draft 1, right? So you sleep with this under your pillow. So they don't do that, so we do. So we're going to give you a very high level so that you have seen what the 9 standards look like. So we're going to start with Standard 1. So as Nancy mentioned, you have a very nice structure now that will be very easy for you to follow. So in every standard, you'll see the numbering scheme. And so this is the standard itself in bold print. Remember that we cannot change the membership. You own these standards. We cannot change anything in the standard proper, and that's what you see on the screen here, without a vote of the membership. We can change other pieces, the basis for judgment, the guidance for documentation, but the standard is what you all agree to hold yourselves accountable to. We can't change a word of that without you. So in Standard 1, strategic planning, the areas that are in red are different from exposure draft 1. So as we click through these slides, you can quickly see, if you read ED1, you can quickly see what's different. In some cases, they're minor wordsmithing changes. In other cases, they're a little bit more bigger. So for example, in 1.2, we added this idea that you have to have a formal risk analysis and plans for how you would mitigate risks. That's an important part of strategic planning that really didn't exist before. So we expect as your plan, you would talk about, okay, what would happen if we have a drop in enrollment, for example? If you're a private school, very dependent on enrollment, what is your plan for dealing with that? So we want to know that you're thinking ahead there. And then we talked about, we didn't explicitly have innovation, so we added that in to strategic planning. So that's what's different in strategic planning. The other is the same. Standard 2 is on physical, virtual, and financial resources. So it's part of the first 3 standards on strategic management and innovation. So Standard 2 is your non-human resources, if you will. So that's everything from your classrooms. What does your business school look like? Is there mold in your room? Do you have the technology people need? Do you have the ability to connect, the connectivity, that sort of thing? And also your financial resources. So what do you look like in terms of operational vitality? What do you look like in terms of your ability to do the things that you say strategically you want to do? So we did have a table in here before that you all told us loudly that you didn't like. So we took that out. So that was table 2-1, and it was a table on operational vitality, where it was designed for you to tell us our budget 5 years ago, our last cycle was this, now our budget's this, so we can kind of see what the trend is. We took that out, and now we ask you just to tell us that in a narrative. It is important, but we just don't put it into a table. And we did keep the table on strategy. So what do you want to do strategically, and how much does that cost, and where is that money going to come from? So that's a very important part of how we support the accreditation effort. The last standard, which is Standard 3, I talked about in fair detail already. So the wording of the standard here has not changed. Some of the nuances were in the basis for judgment and the guidance for documentation. The words of the standards did not change. But implications of these are things I've already mentioned again. So more flexibility, check. Recognizing different types of terminal qualifications, check. And then this I mostly said, but just to hit it again, we did take out the 60%. That was in ED1 also, was removed. Just to remind you, we took out the 60% ratio. Discipline is your default reporting unit. You define the discipline. You will put your faculty into the discipline in which they teach. If they teach in multiple disciplines, consistent with how we do it today, you can show them in more than one discipline. So that's exactly how we do it today. And your ratios are met at the discipline level. Again, I want to emphasize something Nancy said earlier. It is more principles-based. You are looking at the intellectual capital that underlies the disciplines that drive your degrees. If you do not have, let's say, let me just pick something, finance out of the air, and let's say that you have people that are offering introduction to finance, but you have no finance degrees. An unlikely example, but just bear with me. There's a place where you would check and you would say, we don't offer any degrees in this area. And if you check that box, we would not expect you to meet the 40% ratio if you do not offer degrees in that discipline. So I don't want you to worry that that's going to cause more stress on the system. We do think it's as rigorous. We think it's flexible, more flexible. So I believe all of these things I've already talked about, so I'm not going to go over that again. A couple of guardrails in. So some questions have come up, things like, okay, Stephanie, you said that we get to deploy faculty in the way that we want. I've got 60% SA in my area. I choose to have 0% SA in this program. Is that okay? So here's what I would say. The wording that we use, you can see it on the second line there, is we expect to see an appropriate blend of faculty. We do not define what appropriate blend is. That is intentional. That is in the spirit of a principles-based approach. What is an appropriate blend? You, the school, would make your case as to why that is a high-quality choice, how it's aligned with your mission, and how it leads to high-quality outcomes. If you can make that case, and I have seen people make that case, then that would be, I would expect that your peer review team would be okay with that. But it would be on you to make the case. Now, if you're offering doctoral degrees in an area and you have no essay, I would say that's going to be a problem. So some common sense things there as well. But in between, you're going to have more freedom and flexibility there. So we expect if you have research master's degrees or doctoral degrees, 40% is the floor. 40% is not your target, it's sort of the floor. So we expect something higher than that depending on the mission of your school. If you're offering graduate degrees and PhDs, we would expect to see higher numbers. That's very consistent with how we do it today, so not a surprise there. And I talked about this earlier, so the question always comes, okay, can you tell me one more time, by location and modality, I don't have to meet ratios by location and modality. The answer is it's not required on its face, but it would not be appropriate for you to say, now I've decided to use location as the way I deploy faculty. So you can't say, now I'm going to put all my IP faculty, they're all going to go over here, if that's not rational. So you have to be able to describe how you're deploying your faculty, why you're deploying faculty in the way you are, and why that's a good choice for you. So it's not required on its face. Your PRT could ask you if they thought they wanted more information on that. They always have the ability to ask you about how you deploy and choices that you make, not from an auditing standpoint, from an ability to understand how you're doing things and to help guide you for continuous improvement. The next set of standards is called learner success, not student success. Nancy will walk you through those.
Yeah, I'll pay a quarter every time I say student. So there are 4 standards in learner success, and the first one is curriculum. And as Stephanie mentioned, we will focus on the red that you see before you. So when we talk about standard 4 in curriculum, it really does talk about content and management. 4.3 has a lot new, talk about that, and then 4.4 is engagement. So in the first one, curriculum content cultivates agility with current and emerging technologies. That's where we had a table 4-1, and we were going to ask you for your degree programs to talk about those technologies. You prefer narratives to tables, that's what I learned, so we now ask for that information in narrative form rather than in a table that's front and center. And we think that that, again, gives you the opportunity to tell your story about technology. But technology, some people have said, why did you call that out? We do think that it's increasingly important for us in business schools to be thinking about this, and it also is a demonstration of currency. So technology is important. In 4.3, we have several parts to it, and some of these have been added recently. So innovation is there, and as I mentioned before, it might be innovation in the content, it might be in the pedagogy, it might be in the delivery, but we are asking you to talk about that innovation. Experiential learning we've always talked about, and that is a piece of engagement as well. How are your students getting to actually apply some of what they learn? Maybe that's through consulting projects or some of those other activities that you engage in. And then that lifelong learning mindset, how you create that, and I think I spoke about that before. Now here we also have program elements promoting positive societal impact. So we do have societal impact woven throughout the standards as well as in a standalone standard, but here what they're specifically addressing is that curricular content. So where are you talking about societal impact there? And I think every school has many examples. In the Innovation Committee meeting that we had, I guess that was on Saturday, we heard from different deans about what they're doing in their schools with respect to societal impact. And it was amazing how it was in the mission statements and how many activities they're engaged in. But in the curriculum itself, there are also a lot of examples. Maybe you talk about ESG investing in your finance class. Maybe you have a voluntary income tax program where your students go out into the community and they actually do that, and that's a class that your students take. You might have a class or some curriculum around sustainability. So those are the examples that we're looking for here. They're curriculum related for societal impact. Now, standard 5 is the assurance of learning standard. And the biggest change here is really the introduction of the importance or the elevation of the importance of indirect assessment, indirect assurance of learning. So direct has been a big piece of what we do. Many schools do a fabulous job using it, and it informs all of the curricular changes that they make. But many schools also use different kinds of assessment. They use indirect assessments where they survey their alumni. They talk to their advisory councils. They have practitioner boards that come and advise them on specific programs. We think there are many ways that indirect assessment may have a bigger impact on some of your programs versus others. And this is one where we've evolved over time as we've listened to you. Because at first we said, okay, we should have direct and indirect in every program. We realized that was a bit much. So as we talked to you, we also started to realize that some programs lent themselves better to indirect versus direct, and we would look for you to do that. So you may have a specialized master's program, for example, in cybersecurity. That's what I'm going to teach, so I'll say that. But say you have a master's program in that. Well, how might you actually think about that curriculum? It's hard, you'd be hard-pressed to do that without engaging with practice, right? So there may be ways that that program is better updated and competency goals are achieved or recognized by engaging with practice and using some indirect assessment versus direct assessments. So the way the standard is now reads, you may have a program that has just one or the other. We would expect normally, and normally is our favorite word in these standards. It appears
56 now.
56 now. So many, many times, but we love the word normally. Remember, it's the spirit of the standard, and we're looking for a principles approach. But what we do want is normally across your programs, we would expect to see both. For any one, you can have just one. And then exec ed, I told you we did change that from significant to 5%, back to a rule. For learner progression, a change that we've made is the acceptance of transfer credit. And here, what we're looking for is that you have disseminated policies around this. So you explain how you do decide whether or not to accept transfer credit, and also that that transfer credit, actually, the units that you're transferring in are comparable to the academic quality of what it is you're teaching at your own institution. And then post-graduation success, I will say that this is an interesting area because we were told by some schools we aren't able to track what happens to all of our students when they leave us. So we've tried to write that standard in a more flexible way to recognize that there are a variety of approaches to that and different ways that you can prove it or give examples. We do ask for public disclosure as you can of learner progression and post-graduation success. And that may mean admission standards, and it may mean that for your undergraduate program, maybe admissions are at the university level, not at your school level. Your university shows those. We know that you may not be able to track that data, that's fine, but maybe your graduate programs, you actually admit directly, and you would show that information about those admission standards. And then standard 7, teaching effectiveness and impact. Again, impact is one of our 3 pillars, so we wanted to make sure that we talk about that here. And we thought long and hard about how they show impact, and we find there are so many ways that we can do that. We also care a lot about diversity and inclusion, as you might expect, and so you'll see in 7.3, we're continue to be teaching diverse perspectives in an inclusive environment, and there are many, many ways you can show that that happens. Maybe you have seminars that you give in inclusive pedagogy, have your students reading things, have campus meetings around that. So we think that there's a lot that you can do around that. And then again, that lifelong learning shows up, but this time it's the faculty. So how are your faculty continuing to develop and become more and more expert in their particular field or discipline?
Right, in the third category of the standards, we've made quite a major change. In Exposure Draft 1, it was a focus on intellectual contributions, their impact, and the societal impact of our intellectual contributions. So those were the 2 standards that we had there. But we realized, of course, that there's a positive societal impact of business schools in other aspects of what they do than their intellectual contributions. And this was a big gap. So what we've done is we've changed the standards and we've brought the impact of the intellectual contributions on society into Standard 8 and set up a new standard on the societal impact of business schools with everything they do except intellectual contributions, because that is in Standard 8. So if we look at Standard 8, we're talking about the change here. You see the word collectively is gone, and it doesn't mean that every single faculty member needs to be doing research at the absolute highest level, but collectively, as a school, that needs to be the situation. So key changes that we've done, as I said, we've brought the societal impact of intellectual contributions into this standard. Also, something we heard from you when we talked about thought leadership was, well, what is thought leadership? We had a definition. Could we give some examples? So alongside the standards, we have the interpretive guidance. And in the interpretive guidance, we have a couple of examples from schools in each of the 3 regions of AACSB to give you an idea, not to say that these are the only ways that you can do thought leadership, but to give you an idea of what thought leadership is in sub-schools within AACSB. The other change that we've made is in the table where we're identifying the types of intellectual contributions. So we have peer-reviewed articles, and then we have other peer-reviewed and edited intellectual contributions, recognising that there's a wide range of ways that the intellectual contributions may be reviewed or edited apart from peer-reviewed articles. And remember, one of the changes that have come through in the standards, it was in the first exposure, but just to remind you, the requirement for peer-reviewed articles to be predominant or to be the highest contribution is no longer mandatory. You could be a school whose mission is about making a difference to the local business community, and you might be writing white papers that you're distributing amongst that community. And that is quite appropriate given that school's mission. If we come to Standard 9, this is all new. What we're saying is the school demonstrates positive societal impact through internal and external initiatives. By internal, we mean those things that the school does. For example, it might build a new school building which is recognised by some green standards. You might have a multi-campus operation, and previously all the heads of departments used to drive to meetings, and maybe now that they have more virtual meetings. So there are some things that you do internally in your operations that have an impact. And the external initiatives picks up all the things you do in the school. It could be providing access to students from high deprivation areas who go on through their qualifications to make a difference in their lives and to the communities. It could be through connecting with organisations, through helping businesses become profitable so they can hire people. It could be that your students are doing projects with not-for-profit organisations that are making a difference. So there are all these things that we do, and we need to capture those. In this standard, in the interpretive guidance, we also have some examples, two schools from each of the regions of AACSB, examples of the activities that they have been doing that are having a societal impact. This is a wonderful standard, I think, and as Stephanie and all of us do, and everyone we've spoken to say they really like it. It picks up in Standard 1, where in your mission and your strategy, you identify your aspiration. It picks up what's in Standard 4, where it talks about in your curriculum, you have these components that lead to students undertaking things that will have a societal impact. And here you have the opportunity to summarise and to talk about and to show what you are actually doing in that space. So in the standard, you talk about your aspiration, what you've done to date, and what your plans are in the next accreditation cycle.
So if you think back now to where we started with the collective vision, so I hope that you can see how that collective vision is being realized and operationalized through the standards. We think this is a great improvement. We're very excited about it. We hope you're as excited as we are. We still will have another opportunity to have some discussion about it. So let me just give you an idea of where we go from here. So assuming that the standards are voted on and voted positively in April, that vote is at ICAM, then we would have a phase-in period for these standards. So, and this is traditionally how we do it. So there's a 3-year transition to the new standards. We realize there are schools that are having a visit next year. They may not want to go to the new standards. They've put a lot of work into already getting ready. So you would not have to go through the new standards if in the next 3 years. If your visit is 2020, 2021, 2022, any of those 3 years, it's optional for you to go to the new standards. You may stay with 2013 if you so desire. By 2023, which is year 4 after the adoption, it would be mandatory and all schools would be expected to be on the new standards. We looked back at the patterns for what happened in 2013, and there were very few schools that adopted in the first year, mostly because you're so close to having your visit, but then about 70% of schools that were in year 2 adopted the new standards. We expect to have something like that. Very likely, we will have a controlled pilot for the first year, only because we want to make sure we get it right and we see what the issues are. This does require extensive peer review training. So we do have a plan for comprehensive training. We do expect that training is very likely to be mandatory, so we will not deploy people on teams unless they have gone through the peer review training, so everyone is on the same page. Thinking about even like Standard 3, for example, it's not that it's that different, but it's different enough that if you had someone who had not been through the training, they might have a different mindset or a legacy mindset. So we want to make sure everyone goes through the new training before they're deployed on teams. So that is all part of the rollout plan as well. So today is our launch of Exposure Draft 2. There is a 30-day period. Note it is 30 days, not 60, because we had for ED1. So now as we get closer, we expect fewer and fewer changes. So we hope that what you see in ED1 is very, very close to the final. We'll probably still tweak language here and there. We want the membership to see it. We want the membership to have an opportunity to opine on it. So you'll be able to send us feedback. You can do that in writing. I'll show you the email address for that. You can also see us in person, and we'll still be in other places talking about this. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to provide feedback. We had, the first slide said 250. It depends how you count it, but in terms of, we have a mailbox, BATF at AACSB.edu, with some 250 responses. These are individuals that wrote and said, sometimes very long letters about what they wanted and what they liked. So that's kind of what we're looking at here, another opportunity to provide another round. We do respond to those. I read all those, every single one. Please try to send it before the last day, my only request. We got 60 responses on the last day for the first window, so give us time to absorb it and include your changes. And then the vote again is April the 27th. So your window right now is today through March 4th. So if you want to get your comments in, March 4th is your deadline. And then we will finish it up, and then we'll have the vote on April 27th. You will see it. We are required to post it publicly 3 weeks before the vote. So you would see the final that you'd be voting on 3 weeks before. You'll get an email from AACSB. We'll tell you in every way possible. So you'll be able to go out and look at it and read it, have plenty of time before the actual vote. This is the mailbox that you send the comments to, BATF@AACSB.edu. You will get a response from a person, me or one of the other accreditation managers will respond and let you know that we got it and that we are considering it. So look at us, an hour and 2 minutes. I'm very impressed. So with that, what we'd like to do is we have a few minutes to take questions. We know that we do not have time to take all your questions. So questions, or if you would like to make comments, you're welcome to do that as well. So I will just need a little bit of help seeing. So if you'll raise your hand if you have a question, a microphone will be brought to you. Please wait for the microphone. Okay, can you please stand if you don't mind? Yeah, thank you so much. Yep.
Steve Ferris, Ball State University. I just wonder if you could explain with Standard 7.3, where you talk about diverse perspectives, how will we implement that in a highly prescriptive discipline like accounting or tax or finance?
Diverse perspective.
As I mentioned, we want you to tell a story. So we're looking at schools to be able to try to tell us how they do that, how they encourage that they don't have rails that keep students from speaking out or being able to talk about that there aren't a lot of complaints about the faculty not being able to listen. We do meet with students, peer review teams do, so they may be talking to your students when they come in and meet with them about that. Are you encouraged to speak your mind in class and talk about different kinds of issues? So it's really diversity of thought that we're looking for. Many campuses today offer all kinds of programs that they have to try to help their students and their faculty to ensure that there's an inclusive environment. So again, we're looking for you to try to tell your story about that.
Yes?
This is Sarah Gardiel. I'm at the University of Iowa. I never thought I would be saying I was excited about accreditation standards, but I'm about to do it. First of all, I want to thank you all for the amazing amount of work that has gone behind this and tell you I really think there are wonderful things here for all of us in taking, I think, creating a better alignment with the standards and the whole mission-driven piece that we've on that journey for a while, and creating, kind of hitting that sweet spot, I think, between rigor and flexibility. And I think it is the flexibility piece that we've all been wanting for a while. So this is just a big thank you for all of that, and I love the direction this is headed.
Right.
I do want to ask that about the rumor that we might be lengthening the accreditation cycle. Can you speak to that?
So that is a rumor spread by Tim Mescon. So, okay, thank you for asking that, Sarah. At this stage of the game, I don't see that happening. Not that that's impossible. There's still a period of time that our policy committee has to look at this. The policy committee is the committee that has jurisdiction over processes, so it falls under processes. They still have a meeting where they will go through this. That still could be decided. I don't think the momentum is in that direction, and I'll tell you why. Because I know that a lot of deans were really excited about that idea that we might lengthen that cycle. We're excited about the direction. We're excited about the elements of societal impact. We want to have the opportunity to have feedback and bi-directional feedback, and we think 7 years is a really long time to be able to know, are these standards working? It's a long time. Think about that. And just between 2 visits, that's 14 years. So that's we think that that's too long. However, what I would say is, I think the reason people wanted a longer cycle is because the workload is perceived as so heavy and it's so much work. I actually think we're going to accomplish that through the principles-based nature of the standards, and the standards are going to take care of the need for you to have some time between. Does that make sense, Sarah? Okay. I think we're accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish by having standards that are more principles-based. Other questions? Here's the question.
Stunned silence.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute and say thank you. My name's Suzanne Scott. I'm with Brooklyn College, which is part of the CUNY system in New York City. And Standard 9 just speaks so to the heart of who we are, and never really felt there was an adequate way to say what we do. And our value is in societal impact. I think everyone in the room knows that the CUNY schools are on the top 10 repeatedly year after year after year after year of mobility, tests of student mobility, moving from the bottom to the top. And there just wasn't a place that we could use that in terms of accreditation. We have a very, very different student body than a lot of other people in the room, and it presents certain problems. And now there's a way of recognizing what we do through accreditation.
Right.
So thank you.
You're welcome. So I do think that the beauty of this is if you can marry things that you're passionate about with your work, if those two things can come together, I think that's really the sweet spot of life. So we do want to make a difference in the world. We do think business education is a force for good. We believe that. It's in our mission and vision and everything that AACSB is about. Let's put that into the standards. So I think that's going to be a tremendous move forward for us. And so thank you for that comment. Any other questions? So I can't see well, so if I'm missing them.
I know, I might have to do this.
Okay, so does that mean that y'all really like the standards? Take that as a positive sign, yes?
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So why don't I just close by saying, I don't think you can ever say thank you enough. Thank you to all of you, the volunteers, for the BATF members in the audience. Thank you for those 1,000 hours plus. I also, could we please thank Nancy and Jeff as co-chairs, please?
And
Our leader.
Good. And I want to give the last shout out to Karen Beck Dudley. This was her charge when she was board chair. Karen had the courage to say, you know what, it's time for us to do this. Karen, we want to thank you for having the courage and that vision as well. All right, find us at the reception. We're happy to answer more questions. Thank you.